a fresh pair of eyes will have a different perspective from what they've written. And then there will be the engineering or the stakeholders review. The stakeholders can be your development engineers, your quality assurance engineers, your technical marketing engineers, your customer support engineers, and all kinds of people from all disciplines who are involved in this program will get to review these features, feature documentation.
Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast, where Gowri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Anil Hanagud, Documentation Manager at Cisco. Welcome, Anil, to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Gowri.
Super. So, Anil, please help us understand a little bit more about yourself and how did you initially got into documentation?
Okay. I've been in technical writing, technical documentation field for about 16 years now. And a little before that, I was into BPO and I used to do documentation over there and then got to know about technical documentation and then switched over to technical documentation back in 2005.
That's a long journey, Anil. So I'm really eager to know what your experience has been in the last many years. So you were a lead writer at Cisco for over 11 years, right? And recently became a documentation manager.
Yes. I joined Cisco in 2010 and I was a technical writer. And then after a few years, I became a lead writer for my team. And then after my manager quit recently, I was moved into the managerial role. I moved into his position and have been managing this team since June of 2021.
So how's the switch been for you?
Most of my career, I've been as an individual. I've worked as an individual contributor. I haven't had a managerial experience before. So this is my first foray into management. And yeah, it's going to be a big learning curve for me, but I'm enjoying the role so far.
Fantastic. So as a single person in most of the roles, what are your top tips for successfully managing documentation operations?
Stick to the timelines, right? Whatever the project's needs, whatever the needs are, just stick to the timelines and focus on quality. And these two are key aspects.
Great. So again, just to reiterate the amount of experience you had with this field of like 15 years, just shed some lights on how the industry has evolved since you first began.
Okay. When I joined, my first job as a tech writer was at Tally Solutions back in 2005. And we were doing documentation using Microsoft Word. And we were shipping PDFs to our customers. Then I learned about FrameMaker. And again, we were shipping PDFs to our customers through a portal. After I joined Cisco, I got to know about single sourcing content. You write once and then you spin off multiple formats of output that customers may want to use. And then, not just that, we have different forms of communication right now. We just don't stick to text-based documentation. The new age technology demands customers be served in a different ways, not just through user manuals. People prefer to watch videos of, say, an installation. How do I install an access point? How do I install a wireless controller? Or how do I deploy this in wireless network? All of those things can be explained in video format as well. So this is a changing trend that I've observed in my journey so far.
Nice. So you also briefly answered this question to me, sticking to the timeline and making sure everything is done with the expectation. So what is your documentation process at Cisco particularly, and who is normally involved?
Okay. So our process is pretty much simple. Before a project starts, for example, I can give you an example of my team. If the product has a software and it's a major program, it will have 20 plus features added to that version. And it typically has a cycle of about 6 to 7 months from planning to delivery to the customers. So in this period, what we do as tech writers is go through the functional spec documents that engineering would have prepared for us. to refer to, like what the feature is and how it impacts the customer, and what are the ways to configure that feature, maybe using a web UI or a command line interface. What are the commands that I need to run to configure this feature? So all of these things are explained in a software functional spec document, which technical writers initially refer to. And then we start off our work, authoring work based on those spec documents. And post that, we also refer to any of the training that the engineering will conduct to all the stakeholders of the program. And all of this information is consumed and we then start authoring. And then we have a review process where authors or technical writers would do extensive self-review. Then there is a round of peer review so that a fresh pair of eyes will have a different perspective from what they've written. And then there will be the engineering or the stakeholders review. The stakeholders can be your development engineers, your quality assurance engineers, your technical marketing engineers, your customer support engineers, and all kinds of people from all disciplines who are involved in this program will get to review these features, feature documentation, right? So they review, provide feedback, we address their feedback, and then once they've signed off, we send it off to an editorial review. We have an in-house editor, dedicated in-house editor who looks into our documentation and provides all kinds of copy editorial feedback. And then we address them. And then eventually they are ready to get published to the customers.
Fantastic. So even though it looks simple, but I think it's all very well structured and there's a lot of checkpoints, right? So
yes,
any more inputs on your documentation workflow?
One thing I forgot to mention is that for the self-review, we also use a tool called Acrolinks that's plugged into our authoring system, which will help you, the tool suggests different kinds of grammatical inputs for the writers. For example, what we do in TechCom is typically use active voice as much as possible. So writers sometimes might have used passive voice while writing instructions to the end users. So Acrolinks does this check to suggest to the writers that, hey, here is where you could use active voice. So all of these suggestions are taken into account, and then we end up getting a quality output from the writers themselves for review purposes.
Right. So what advice do you have for technical writers who want to one day maybe move into a leadership role?
Leadership role. I mean, if you're into people, if you're allowed to interact with people, if you have enough expertise in handling all the processes that is related to documentation, you should be thorough with processes. You should be thorough with the technologies that your team uses, and then you should be a people person. So if all of these things, if you're into them, then you can be a successful people manager.
Nice. That's again a very clear definition on how to manage the team, Anil. I know now you are a documentation manager, but how is your reporting structure, or how did you report on your documentation when you used to do, and who did you report to? I'm guessing now people are reporting to you, but if you can help us understand a little bit on those lines, so it'll be great.
Sure. As you know, Cisco Systems is a pretty big company. We have if I'm not wrong, over 300 to 400 writers worldwide. And our team, we belong to an organization called Enterprise Networking and Cloud. So we work mainly on switching, wireless, and routing products. And we belong to the operations group, which contains technical writers and program managers. Right? Our senior manager has 3 teams under him. One is a switching team, one is a wireless team, and one is a routing team. I handle the wireless team. And I have a team of about 8 writers. And many of these writing groups report to the senior manager, who in turn reports to a director of operations located in Bangalore. And that director in turn reports to a VP of operations who is in San Jose.
Great. So it's more like a global team with different roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great. And again, just coming back to the long history you have with the documentation field. So what has been the most important innovation when it comes to document tracking in the last 15 or so years of your career?
Important innovation has been the video documentation. Earlier, as I mentioned, the text-based documentation, although I'm not downplaying its usefulness. It is very useful, and it's easy to search for text rather than for videos. But when it comes to quick references or quick or useful instructions about, say, configuring a feature or deploying a feature in a scenario, the video documentation really helps. That's the user's mentality. If I were to say, for example, I bought a new phone, I want to configure it, I want to set it up. The first thing I would do is go to YouTube and say, okay, show me how to set this phone up. I wouldn't actually refer to the phone's documentation that comes with the package, but I would rather go to YouTube to search for any videos. So the video documentation kind of is very, very helpful these days. And that's one big change that I see.
Yes, that's very well said, Anil. And we do that for almost all appliances now, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's great. And is my guess correct that the Cisco documentations are all publicly available and not held privately?
Yeah, all documentation is publicly available except online help. Of course, you'll have to access through the product, but most of the content is publicly available. Yes.
Great. So in that sense, are you aware of any organic search traffic being generated from your knowledge base by the marketing team?
I know that there is an IT organization dedicated to search engine optimization, and there is some work being done about that, but it's not yet complete. It's still work in progress.
All right. Absolutely. So I think with that, we've done with our general questions, but I do have some rapid fire round questions for you, Anil. Are we good to start with that?
Sure, go ahead.
Super. Who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
Before I joined Cisco, I used to work at a company called CDC Software, and our manager there was Anupama A. I don't know if you have heard about her. She's a former STC India president, and I learned a lot from her, and I learned a lot from that team as well. So we were a great team there, and with some brilliant minds contributing to the community. And I learned a lot from that team. So I'm very thankful to that.
Thank you, Anupama. Can you share a documentation-related resource you have consumed recently?
I keep attending these manage the docs. Since I recently moved to the managerial role, there is a weekly session that happens with Twin. If you know Akash Dubey from Twin, he is organizing a series of presentations from different experienced folks from the community about how to manage the doc teams. So I've greatly benefited from these sessions. So these are very helpful.
Super. Thank you for that resource. Can you just name that resource one more time, Anil?
Manage the docs.
Right. Okay.
It's available on LinkedIn as well. Yeah.
Manage the docs. Great. So what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Okay. Learn how to write scripts and how to make videos. I would have given that piece of advice. So when I started off, as you know, I didn't imagine that videos or video documentation would come into the fore. Yeah, I would have given myself an advice to learn how to make videos.
Great. So that's very sweet and easy one to do, I guess.
Yeah.
So I think with that, we are a kind of end of our podcast, Anil. So is there anything you would like to add to our audiences before we say bye to them?
No, thank you. Stay safe, stay focused on your work. That's it.
Super. So once again, thank you, Anil, for sharing your unique experience and journey with us. So as I've been emphasizing in the conversation, being in this field for more than 15 years is not a small thing to estimate. So good luck with all your future projects. And as you said, stay safe and be happy.
Thanks, Gowri. Thanks for having me on the show. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.